Hey, all you cool cats and kittens. It's your favorite history teacher, back at you again with another historical video. And today we are finally going to talk about the Enlightenment. We got a lot of slides to cover, so let's just get into it. All right. So, put this up at the top of your papers, in your notebooks. The ideas of the Enlightenment. Chapter 3, Lesson 2. Let's get it started. All right, that was your warm up. Objectives, we're going to identify how Enlightenment ideas impacted art and architecture. We're going to summarize the Philosophs' use of Isaac Newton's methods to discover natural laws of human life and draw conclusions about the beliefs of the Philosophs. So, two Englishmen's thoughts. The Enlightenment was an 18th century philosophical movement of intellectuals who were greatly impressed with the achievements of the scientific revolution. What we studied last time. The favorite words among these intellectuals was reason, and that's why this time period is also called the Age of Reason. By reason, these intellectuals meant the application of the scientific method to an understanding of all life. These ideas were meant to break from the superstitions of the medieval period and Renaissance before them. They had hoped that using the scientific method, they could make progress towards a better society than the one they had inherited. And the intellectuals of the Enlightenment were greatly influenced by two Englishmen, John Locke and Isaac Newton. Locke's essay concerning human understanding argued that every person was born with a blank mind and that people were molded by the experiences that came through their senses from the surrounding world. Thinkers began to believe if environments were changed and people were exposed to the correct influences, they could be changed to create a new and better society, just like your influence to take notes on this YouTube channel. Newton believed the physical world operated according to natural laws and that those laws could be uncovered through systematic investigation. Thinkers reasoned that if Newton was able to discover natural laws that govern the physical world, then by applying his scientific methods, they would be able to discover the natural laws that govern human society, which would in turn result in an ideal society. Idealism, perfection. So that's John Locke on the left and Isaac Newton on the right, who discovered gravity. All right, it's a French thing. Intellectuals in the Enlightenment were known as by the French term philosophe, meaning philosopher. Not every philosopher was French, nor were all philosophers strict to the sense of the term. Many philosophers were writers, professors, journalists, economists, and above all, social reformers. They came chiefly from the nobility and middle classes. Most leaders of the Enlightenment were French, although the English provided the philosophical inspiration for the movement. It was the French philosophers who affected intellectuals elsewhere and created a movement that influenced the entire Western world. To the Philosophs, the role of philosophy was to change the world. The use of reason and a spirit of rational criticism were to be applied to everything, including religion and politics. So here's some Philosophs. So we have Ben Franklin. Yes, he was one. David Hume, Dennis Diderot. I don't know this Burke guy, but you got Voltaire, Thomas Jefferson, Immanuel Kant, and Goethe. I don't know Dutch. All right, separation of powers. So, test question right off the bat. Charles Louis de Secondat, the Baron de Montesquieu, was a French noble. His famous work, The Spirit of the Laws, published in 1748, was a study of governments, and in it, Montesquieu tried to find natural laws that govern the social and political relationships of human beings. Montesquieu stated that England's government had three branches: the executive, the monarch, the legislative, parliament, and the judicial, the courts of law. The government functioned through a separation of powers, and in it, the three powers limit and control the other in a system called checks and balances. If you remember from your 8th grade year, there you go. By preventing one group from getting too much power, this system provides the greatest freedom and security to the state. And when translated, his work would become the principles of the United States Constitution. So that's his book on the right, and that's his profile. Baron de Montesquieu. There's a meme. The U.S. checks and balances system is just a sophisticated version of rock, paper, scissors. All right, religious toleration. So the greatest figure of the Enlightenment was a guy named Francois-Marie Arouet, known simply by his pen name, Voltaire. He was from Paris. Voltaire also came from a prosperous middle-class family. His numerous writings during the 18th century brought him fame and wealth. And Voltaire was well known for his criticism of Christianity. He often challenged the actions of the church, one of the most powerful institutions of the time. He had a strong belief in religious toleration, fighting against religious intolerance in France. He was a proponent of deism, in 18th century religious philosophy based on reason and natural law. Deism built on the idea of the Newtonian world machine. In the deist view, a mechanic, God, had created the universe. The universe was like a clock where God, the clock master, created it, set it in motion, and allowed it to run without interference and according to its own laws. Oh, sorry for the yawn. There's Voltaire, a young Voltaire. All right, change in thinking. So Denis Diderot went to the University of Paris, and his father had hoped he would pursue a career in law or the church, and he did neither. Instead, Diderot became a writer that covered many subjects. Diderot's most famous contribution to the Enlightenment was his version of the Encyclopedia, or Encyclopédie in French, or the long term, the Classified Dictionary of the Sciences, Arts, and Trades, which was a 28-volume collection of knowledge that he edited. The purpose of the encyclopedia was to change the general way of thinking. His book would become a weapon against the old French society. Many of the articles in his book attacked religious superstition and supported religious toleration. Other articles called for social, legal, and political reforms. It was sold to doctors, clergymen, teachers, and lawyers. The encyclopedia spread Enlightenment ideas. And that's Diderot. All right, laissez-faire. So the Philosophs believed that Newton's methods could be used to discover natural laws, underlining all areas of human life, and this led to what we would call the social sciences, areas like economics and political science. The Physiocrats and a Scottish philosopher named Adam Smith have been viewed as the founders of modern social science of economics. Physiocrats were a group of that were interested in identifying the natural economic laws that govern human society. They maintained that if individuals were free to pursue their own economic self-interest, all society would benefit. And the Physiocrats believed the state should not interrupt the free play of natural economic forces by imposing regulations on the economy. So that doctrine that I didn't have you write in red is known in its French name, laissez-faire, or to let do, or to let people do what they want. So there you go. Hands off. Government should not interfere in economics. Hands off the economy. So here, I Googled Physiocrats. This is a picture that showed up. I've also Googled salon, And this picture also showed up. So, you know, Google. So the father of economics, the clear statement of laissez-faire was made in 1776 by Adam Smith in his famous work, The Wealth of Nations. Like the Physiocrats before him, Smith believed that the state should not interfere in economic matters. This idea is the foundation of what is called a market economy, what the United States has, where the pricing of goods and services are guided solely by the interactions between people and businesses. And according to this idea, there should be little to no government intervention in economics. Smith had three basic roles for governments. It should protect society from invasion, so use of an army. That it should defend individuals and their property from injustice, like the police. And it should keep up public works that private individuals alone cannot afford, but which are necessary for social interaction and trade, like roads and canals. That's Adam Smith. Supply and demand. You'll get this again in economics, but the market economy, what is the amount of something you own and you sell it at a certain price. Now, based on your supply, if you have a lot of PS5s, no, that's a bad idea. If you have a lot of tube socks, Nike tube socks, the demand for them is going to be low. But if you have a low supply, I don't know if you can see my mouse. If you have a low supply of, say, like, I don't know, Yeezys, the demand is high, but the supply is low. If it doesn't make sense, hopefully I explained it good in class. So new political thoughts. Enlightenment political thinkers of the 18th century were inspired by 17th century political thinkers like John Locke, Thomas Hobbes, and their emphasis on natural rights. They found inspiration in the English Bill of Rights, which firmly established the concept of the rule of law. These ideas, coupled with Europe's Judeo-Christian culture and the rediscovery of Greco-Roman philosophy, would influence the Enlightenment on democracy, representation, and good governance. During the Enlightenment, ideas such as the divine right of kings and unquestionable status of nobles and clergy had been the foundation of government for centuries. These methods of governing are authoritarian and promoted strict obedience to rulers at the expense of personal freedoms. Some of these political ideas of the Enlightenment also had their origins in the Judeo-Christian culture and Greco-Roman philosophy. Jewish and Christian scriptures promoted ideas of kindness, fairness, and equality. Ideas of the Greeks and Romans were inspired political thought of the Enlightenment. The Greeks, like Plato and Aristotle, held up the concept of the rule of law as essential to preserving the rise of a tyrannical government. The rule of law holds that all people, both those who govern and the people who they govern, are equal under the law. Enlightenment thinkers adopted Greco-Roman ideas of citizenship, which viewed public service as necessary for government to maintain its authority. Enlightenment thinkers found their inspiration in ancient forms of government, such as the democracy of ancient Athens, in which male citizens had an equal vote. The republican form of government used in ancient Rome, in which administrative officials were elected to represent the interests of their community. So you always have this Hobbes. This is Thomas Hobbes right here. We don't really mention him because, well, Hobbes believes in the questions of why form a government is to protect us from ourselves. Where does the power reside? He said the king. And can a government's power be limited? He believes no. And should there be a right of revolution? He also said no. John Locke, on the other hand, said, why do we form governments? To protect our people's natural rights, life, liberty, and property. Where does the power ultimately reside? He says the people. In the other question, can a government's power be limited? He believes yes, John Locke. And the right of revolution? Of course, John Locke says yes. Sign on the dotted line. One of the most famous philosophers of the late Enlightenment was a guy named Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Get used to saying French names in this class. In his discourse on the origins of the inequality of mankind, Rousseau argued that people had adopted laws and governments in order to preserve their private property. In this process, they had become enslaved by the government and needed to regain their freedom. So in his major work, The Social Contract, 1762, Rousseau presented his concept of the social contract in which an entire society agrees to be governed by its general will. Individuals who wish to instead follow their own self-interest must be forced to abide by the general will. Liberty, freedom, is achieved by being forced to follow what is best for the general will. I'm getting tired of saying general will, because the general will represents what is best for the entire community. In other words, individuals give up certain natural rights to their government in return for benefits shared by everyone else in society. That's what it means in layman's terms. The concept of a social contract became important to the Enlightenment political thought as it reinforced the idea that the people, rather than kings or queens, form the foundation of the state's government. Governments exist to protect the people's natural rights, again, according to John Locke. And that's Rousseau, a young Rousseau. Say you want a revolution. Beatles. Ultimately, Enlightenment thinkers saw governments that did not respect the social contract as illegitimate. The people, they argued, were free to overthrow such a government and to create a new one that would be better reflect the will of the people. This includes all forms of governments that did not protect an individual's natural rights, from absolute monarchies to representative republics and democracies. Enlightenment political ideas would become more popular as monarchs became more authoritarian over the course of the 18th century. Eventually, these ideas would inspire revolutions in America and Europe. That's right there. This statement. If you're not protecting our natural rights, we have the right to overthrow your government. All right, something about Mary. For centuries, male intellectuals argued that the nature of women made them inferior to men and made male domination of women necessary. However, by the 18th century, female thinkers began to express their ideas about improving the condition of women. A known philosopher, Mary Wollstonecraft, an English writer, advanced the strongest statement for the rights of women. That should be for, not food. Many see her as the founder of modern European and American movements for women's rights. In her book, A Vindication of the Rights of Woman, Wollstonecraft identified two problems with the views of Enlightenment thinkers. She noted that the same people who argued that women must obey men also said that the government based on arbitrary power of monarchs over their subjects was wrong. So, a whole gender being having the power over the other gender is also the same as a government having too much power over their subjects. It's not wrong. Wollstonecraft further argued that the Enlightenment was based on an ideal of reason in all human beings. Therefore, because women, as the previous Philosophs stated, because women have reason, they are entitled to the same rights as men. I mean, if the Philosophs didn't say all human beings, maybe this doesn't start. But if you're going to read it for what it's worth, philosophers believe that all human beings have the power of reason. All human beings also include women. So more power to you, Mary. So according to her, women should have equal rights in education as well as in economic and political life. So this is our girl, Mary Wollstonecraft. Is that really gray hair? Probably not. All right. Reading is what? Fundamental. Of great importance to the Enlightenment was the spread of its ideas to the literate elite of European society. The growth of publishing and the reading public grew during the 18th century. Books that had previously been aimed at small groups of the educated elite, now books were directed at the new reading public of the middle classes, which included women and urban artisans. An important aspect to the growth of publishing and reading was the development of magazines and newspapers for the general public. The first newspaper printed daily was in London, 1702. Newspapers were relatively cheap and were even provided free in many coffee houses, and coffee houses served as great gathering places for the exchange of ideas, or where you need to do your work. go to a coffee house, aka Starbucks. Enlightenment ideas were also spread through the salon. Invited salons were the elegant drawing rooms of the wealthy upper classes. Great urban houses invited guests gathered in these salons to take part in conversations that were often centered on the new ideas of these philosophs. The salons brought writers, artists together with aristocrats, government officials, and wealthy middle class people. The people in power got to hear the people's words in homes. So, aristocratic women who hosted these salons were in a position to sway political opinion and to help spread the ideas of the Enlightenment. So if you don't know RuPaul's Drag Race, you should, because reading is fundamental. Anyways, here's a picture of a salon. A lot of women. Maybe this is the wrong one, but this looks like Ben Franklin. A very pixelated portrait. All right, the method. Although many philosophs attacked Christian churches, most Europeans in the 18th century were still Christian. People sought a deeper personal connection to God. In England, the most famous new religious and evangelical movement, Methodism, was the work of one man, John Wesley, or Wesley. Wesley had a mystical experience in which the gift of God's grace assured him salvation. This experience led him to become the missionary of the English people to bring them to the glad tidings of salvation. His sermons, often given 2 or 3 times a day, caused people to have emotional conversion experiences. Many converts then joined the Methodist societies to do good works. One notable reform they had influence was the abolition of the slave trade in the early 1800s. That's John Wesley. Art. So the Enlightenment had an impact on the world of culture, where Europeans witnessed both traditional practices and important changes in art, music, and literature. The palace of Louis XIV at Versailles in France made an enormous impact on Europe. Other European leaders that followed Louis XIV's lead also built grand residences in their countries. These palaces were modeled on the Italian Baroque style of the 1500s and 1600s, then the late 18th century French classical styles of Versailles. One of the greatest architects was a guy named Balthasar Neumann. He built the Church of the 14 Saints and the residence for a place in Germany. In these buildings, secular and spiritual became one, as lavish and fanciful ornament, light, bright colors, and elaborate detail greet your visitor. Baroque and neoclassical styles that had dominated 17th century art continued in the 18th century, but by the 1730s, a new artistic style, Rococo, had spread all over Europe. And unlike Baroque, unlike the Baroque style, which stressed grandeur and power, Rococo emphasized grace, charm, and gentle action. That's a test question. Rococo made use of delicate designs colored in gold with graceful curves. Rococo style was highly secular, and its lightness and charm spoke to the pursuit of pleasure, happiness, and love. So this is an example of Baroque architecture. I believe this is the Church of the 14 Saints, because why else would it look like a church? Okay, if you don't know, these are normal sized people, and that's a car. So this church is very big. Here's some Baroque art. This is some Rococo, okay, curves, gilded, stuff is gold. And I looked up Rococo art. You really think nobles are going to be playing in the fields with sheep? Come on. Come on. Come on. All right. So, music. 18th century Europe produced some of the world's most enduring music. 2 geniuses of the second half of the century, Franz Joseph Haydn and Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, were innovators who wrote classical music rather than the Baroque style of Bach and Handel. Haydn spent most of his life as a musical director for wealthy Hungarian princes. Visits to England introduced him to the world in which musicians wrote for public concerts rather than princely patrons. And Mozart, if you didn't know, was a true child prodigy in music. He performed his first concert the age of 6, and he wrote his first opera at the age of 12. I don't know about you, but I wasn't doing that at 6 or 12 in my day. However, he would be unable to secure a regular patron to support him financially, so it has made his life miserable. He died in squalor, a drunk, a bum, and I think he died at the age of like 32, 36. So here's Franz Joseph Haydn, and here's Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. And that concludes our slideshow. So a lot of stuff. I'm pretty sure this was over 20 minutes long of taking notes. Sorry about it. I mean, it's the Enlightenment. It's a lot of things. This is a starting point for what is to come, where we talk about revolutions and forming governments in world history. The Enlightenment is a great starting point. So hopefully we understand this fully, because a lot of what we just talked about is going to help you further on in this class. All right. Your homework is page 105, 2 through 4, the lesson 2 review, or what is it called? Yeah, lesson 2 review, if you find it on your online textbook. So there you have it. All right. If you guys did enjoy that, make sure you hit that like button, leave a comment, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.